Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Crop. I'm your host, Anna Heslop, and my guest today is Ivan Lawrie, who is the Chair of Seed and Grain Readiness and Response, which we call SGRR, and I'm going to get him to explain more about that shortly. The reason that Ivan is here is because SGRR will be implementing a biosecurity levy on arable farmers this year. So, first of all, Ivan, what is SGRR?
So, SGRR, Seed and Grain Readiness and Response, is a partnership between three farmer organizations, and that is Federated Farmers Arable Group, United Wheat Growers, and Foundation for Arable Research, and industry partners New Zealand Grain and Seed Trade Association and the New Zealand Flour Millers Association. So across those five partners sitting around the table is represented the majority of the arable industry value chain. The purpose for Seed and Grain Readiness and Response, and going back a little bit in history, that has taken over a decade to be implemented. The purpose of Seed and Grain Readiness and Response is to do some preventative work around potential threats to the arable industry coming from overseas, but also the ability to respond to those threats in partnership with the Ministry for Primary Industries through a mechanism that's known as the GIA, or Government Industry Agreement, to which we formally signed up to in 2020.
So do we have to do this? Why is biosecurity so important for our industry?
So the survival of the arable industry in New Zealand relies heavily on our ability to trade with our international partners. It's no mystery to arable farmers that a lot of the seed that we multiply in New Zealand is for use overseas. Hence, that material gets imported on an annual basis to New Zealand, multiplied up and re-exported. So there's a great deal of that. There is also the importance of some seed material that is not produced in New Zealand that we need as growers to be able to produce the resulting crop from. And there's also breeding material that keeps our breeding programs ahead of the game and competitive in the world terms, and that means exchange of germplasm. So all of these things are really important for us to be able to maintain, as an island nation, the cleanest and most reliable way of continuing to produce those crops.
So we don't want any weird or wonderful insects or pests or diseases or weeds in those crops, because that's going to make trade difficult.
Absolutely not. We see the horror stories around, for example, black grass in Europe and in the UK. We personally experienced that last year by seeing that. We've had incursions. There will be more incursions of these sort of things. Our job is to try and stop them as early as possible and prevent our farmers from having to bear the cost of that.
Okay, so why are we then implementing this biosecurity levy now? There have been incursions?
Yes, there have been two incursions that have directly, or more importantly, affected the arable industry. One of them mainly for maize growers, and that was related to the fall armyworm discovery in Tauranga in 2022, which we have been dealing with over the past year. And the, I would say, recurring but ever-present threat of blackgrass, and we are currently responding to an incursion of blackgrass in 2021 in December that we responded to over Christmas, and that is ongoing.
So how much we're asking growers, SGRR is asking the arable industry to contribute a levy for biosecurity. What does that actually buy? What does it pay for?
Okay, that's a very good question. So obviously the minute that you are in responding to an incursion, there are costs. Some of those costs are directly related to surveillance and detection and monitoring of where the pest or the disease or the wheat has established in the country. So collecting all of that information. Then there is the cost of laboratory work and diagnostics, which is to actually determine what the pest is and if it is the pest that we are worried about. And then in the unfortunate case where action is taken to completely destroy the presence of that pest, disease, or insect, and the crop has to be destroyed, then there is the cost of reimbursing the farmer, compensating the farmer for losses of their crops. So all of those things can build up significantly into the cost. So some can be quite inexpensive in relative terms. For example, the fall armyworm was a definite period, and we realized after 1 year of collecting data that we would not be able to eradicate this pest, so it's finite. In the case of blackgrass, where growers had to be compensated and plant material destroyed, transported, bales incinerated, and the costs go on, then there is a significant cost to the industry. That doesn't mean to say we pay for the whole lot. We don't. So there's a starting point where the government is going to cover 50% of the costs of any response or readiness activity. Then it is determined what sectors are actually involved as beneficiaries of this action. I say this is quite important because people think that the blame should be relative to the costs shouldered in the cost of a response. It doesn't work like that. It is about who benefits from responding. And so that is the critical difference.
And who being the industry.
So who in the industry, what sectors, because it could be a pest or disease that affects not just the arable industry. In the case of fall armyworm, sweet corn growers from processed vegetables and from fresh vegetables are also affected by this pest. So naturally, it's not just the arable farmers who are going to shoulder the cost for that. So those proportions of the costs are related to the size of the crop and the size of the industry that's been affected.
Okay. So the incursions that have led to this levy being implemented specifically are looking at covering the costs of that fall armyworm first year and dealing with some paddocks that had blackgrass in them where whole crops needed to be destroyed and the growers compensated.
Correct. So, as I say, there is a cost-sharing exercise. MPI starts at 50%, but normally in all of these cases has ended up covering more than 60% because there are non-signatory beneficiaries which are covered by MPI, because if a pest or weed is viewed as a threat to conservation land, for example, then the government will pay for that portion. It's not industry. To date, we already have accumulated a cost with respect to fall armyworm, which is just under $100,000 our share. The total cost of that response was well over $400,000. So we're paying about, our share as an industry is about 25%. And of that 25%, our industry partners in the seed industry and seed merchants will cover 50% of that cost, and the growers will bear 50% of that cost. So it's not going to be huge when you break it down.
So that would suggest perhaps the expenditure on blackgrass was a bit higher.
The blackgrass was significantly higher even just for the first year. We do not know what year 2 costs have accumulated yet to the last detail, but we already know that we have our share of year 1 response at around $400,000, which already triggers the need for a levy because Seed and Grain Readiness and Response doesn't have that sort of money sitting there.
So let's get on to the levy itself. When, where, how, as a grower, when, how do I find out about this, and how do I pay it, and who am I paying?
So there's a very strict and clear process to go through with government to trigger a levy, and we don't do this lightly because growers in general are already having to pay a commodities levy for research, and I'll just stress the point that this is completely separated from FAR. This is not a levy money that goes to FAR or has anything to do with FAR. This goes to Seed and Grain Readiness and Response, ultimately to pay for MPI costs in responses to incursions. So it's quite separate. On the arable response, these costs are capped at 1%, but we're actually triggering a levy at 1/10 of that. So it's going to be a 0.1% levy for the arable crops. That'll be shared equally between the merchants and the growers. And for the maize levy, because it's collected slightly different in a different mechanism, it is a 0.5% of the cost on a bag of seed, and that again is split equally between the merchants, seed companies, and the grower on the other side.
And so when is this going to happen? When are people going to have to pay this?
So the levy order was established in 1 July 2022, and the first 6 months, the rate was set at 0. Given the response cost accumulation, the Board of Seed and Grain Readiness and Response reviewed the levy to be set for this current year at the levels that I've just described. And in order to give organization time to put mechanisms in place to collect it, it'll start on 1 April 2024 for any arable transactions occurring from then on. And in the case of maize, it's slightly different. It will be for the maize seed sales of next year. But I repeat, it's less than 1/10 of what the current FAR levy is, just to make a point of comparison.
And so how will they be invoiced? How is this going to be paid?
So this will be collected through the merchants. The devil is in the detail, as they say. This is all new to us, and we're going to set it up. So we imagine that there will be some questions and some hiccups along the way around who collects, how to collect. And while we have gone through a very, very detailed process of the mechanisms, I am sure there will be more questions and more concerns. So I really want anybody who does have concerns to either email info@sgrr.org.nz or email me directly at ivan.lawrie@far.org.nz, and I will try and answer your questions.
Yeah, because this is really a new thing we're trying to do, right?
It's a very new thing. It's complicated. I think the spirit of all the partners in SGRR, and including the GIA partnership, the spirit of the game was very good and very noble, that we would share costs amongst different parties so the grower doesn't have to cover the whole burden of the cost. Implementing that is actually more complicated than it seems, and we're working through that with our accounting firm that's helping us with us. The idea is we will collect enough money to cover the costs of what we owe so far, and we will pay it back as we collect. We have no means of paying back what we don't have. And the board's discretion is to build a small amount as a fighting fund for any future responses. That doesn't mean to say we're going to accumulate millions of dollars in an account. It's going to be enough or equivalent for the immediate actions that are required in a response. That'll vary from year to year, and when we consider that hopefully we don't have any responses for a few years and we don't accumulate any more expenses, then the levy will just be shut off. It will be set at 0 again until it's required again.
Okay, so it sounds like a really good reason to keep an eye on everything on your farm biosecurity-wise.
Absolutely, Anna. We can't stress this enough. the reason we have detected and been so successful so far in controlling blackgrass in New Zealand has been the very diligent work done by reps, technicians, advisors, farm staff, people and growers who are out there keeping an eye on their crop. All we can say is everybody involved in an industry has a responsibility to monitor and keep an eye on these nasties. Everybody is fallible, so the more eyes we have looking at a crop, the more easily things can be brought to our attention. And don't hesitate to report it, because there is no negative consequence for reporting. There is help there, there's compensation there if it were required. In most cases, that is not what's going to happen. In most cases, what's going to happen is we can quickly identify the issue and respond to it before it's too late.
And you're happy also to get false calls where people are unsure?
Absolutely. We get and we welcome reports on fall armyworm or suspected fall armyworm finds throughout the country that then turn out they're not fall armyworm. They might be tropical armyworm or cosmopolitan armyworm or corn earworm. We welcome the photographs. Send them in. We will be able to triage and tell you whether it's an issue or not. Thanks to the very good work of Ash Mills, who's our biosecurity officer at FAR, he's always happy to respond to any questions from the general public or from arable farmers.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. So biosecurity is the name of the game, and unfortunately, due to these couple of incursions, there will be a biosecurity levy coming into effect during this year, and it will stay there for as long as it is required and then be switched off. And on that not so happy note, I'm sorry, but have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.